I used to get really stressed out because I used to be that kind of person where I would think, oh man, if only I didn't do this, if only I did that. But then you realize you don't know what you're gonna think until you think it, right? You don't know to do something. Obviously I should have done that, right? Why didn't I do that? I should have done that. Well, at the time, there was no way for you to have known that. Even if you did know it, there's a reason why you ended up choosing something instead of that. And you couldn't have done that differently, right? You couldn't have made it so that the pull to do the thing that you should have done is greater than the pull to do whatever you ended up doing. And I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I keep reminiscing about the past or feeling nostalgic or feeling regretful. And I'm always like, damn, things did not play out the way that it should have. But then I think, oh, at any moment, I was thinking about something, right? I was doing something, right? Something was appearing to me. And the thing that I feel like I should have done just simply did not occur to me. No matter how trivial or how big a decision is, or an action, or anything, right? No matter how small or how big it is, if it didn't occur to you to do that, or decide on it, even if bouncing between different decisions, you end up making a final decision. And if your final decision didn't occur to you to do that, there was no other way you could have done it, but it still makes sense to try, if there is such thing as trying, right, for all intents and purposes, to make decisions that affect the future. And it's very asymmetrical, right? Because you would think, okay, if there is no way I could have changed the past or done things differently, then that makes doing things useless going forward. That's not the case. It's very asymmetrical. Every decision you make absolutely has an impact on how the future plays out, but the final decision that you end up making, after you've made it, there was no way for you to have done it differently. Right? You see how weird that is? It's very asymmetrical. This is kind of a very particular heavy topic. That is a very hot take. What about this idea do people not want to accept, right? People want to feel like they're the ones that come up with their thoughts. The only reason you would do that is to protect this egocentric view of your experience of the world, right? This feeling that there's a you in the center of everything. But that's not fun anyway, right? That leads to a lot of unnecessary psychological suffering. You don't need to feel like the center of everything for things to be beautiful. Right? You should still prefer good things over bad things. You should still want to be happy and try to make good decisions. But whether or not they end up being made isn't really up to you. Like, yeah, there are choices that you make, but you don't choose why you make those choices. And even if you did, there's some reason why you do the things that you do. You know, you can keep going back further and further and further, and there comes a point where it's like, well, at one point you didn't have a decision made, or you didn't have an idea, or you didn't have a thought, and then all of a sudden you did have a thought. The farther back you try to trace it, you will eventually come up empty because you can't account for subconscious or unconscious processes, right? Things kind of just appear to you, right? If you're, like you told me the example of musicians, right? Or songwriters, you know? Well, then what are they, right? Other people don't create these ideas. Where do the ideas come from? They must create them. It's like previous experiences, right? Or previous thoughts. And it sets up all of the conditions such that they're in a place such that the thought appears to them in that way, right? And if you were to rewind the clock to the moment before a genius has a genius idea, they would have thought the same idea over and over again until the end of time. That's basically the thing that frustrates me sometimes, and what also gives me a lot of psychological relief is when you accept that you can explain things in a matter of cause and effect, but you can't really take credit for why things play out the way that they do. You can't take credit for who you are as a person because you didn't choose your brain, you didn't choose your parents, you didn't choose your environment, right? You did make decisions and you choose things, but you are not the core author of why those things were chosen. You talked before about like you went through like a depressed period or you dealt with some like mental health stuff. And for me, whenever I go through stuff like that, afterwards I tend to linger in it too much and I tend to ruminate on the past and think, fuck, why did I spend all this time doing this? Why did I do that? You know, why I should have done this differently. Do you get stuck in that loop, and how do you break out of that?
Yeah, so that was like a part of what I went through. I have really bad OCD, and during the pandemic, it got a little bit out of control just because my structure went away, and then all I had left was my freedom. I've seen what happens when you have too much freedom. You know, the chaos does brew. So I was in a state of mind where I'd wake up and replay a lot of the mistakes I've made in my life, even stuff that like never even happened, making up scenarios in your mind that won't ever happen. A lot of that is necessary, and I think what kind of helped me is to understand the brain, and a lot of times that's what we do to kind of get over certain things or traumas that happened in the past, and sometimes you need to replay it a bajillion times so you could say that final time, like, I'm gonna react different to this, just really dark stuff in my life, right? But I always knew it wasn't me, right? It wasn't stuff that I wanted to do. It was just a bunch of intrusive thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So
intrusive thoughts are very frustrating.
They're very frustrating, and especially if you have a really good imagination where your imagination is vivid and you can kind of see the scenarios. Yeah. It could be very haunting, but then, at a certain point in life, I was like, I'm just gonna take control of my life again because it's nothing but the imagination.
Yeah, so I think people tend to be really suffering from this when you're very creative, so you have a very vivid imagination and you tend to get lost in thought a lot, and you're very neurotic, so you tend to lean towards negative thinking. So that helps for creativity, right? Because you have taste, because you're very critical of things, and you also think of a lot of novel ideas, and you get lost in your head, but it tortures you. So it's like, you said this before, it's like, oh, every genius has to have like some sort of crazy or whatever you talked about. Right?
That's what makes us great, man.
Yeah, exactly. But then you said, oh, at this final moment or this final repetition of this thought, at some point you decide that you want to do something different. Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like? Because for me, one thing I think about is the fact that there's kind of a finality to things that happened in the past where regardless of whether or not I think about it, there's no other way it could have happened, right? And the thought that loops in your head is this illusion, this lie that you could have done it differently. But I don't believe you can do things differently. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, what happened, it is what it is, maybe you could have, but it's like it happened already, And who knows, like, you're right, but like, there's no, I don't think there's like a definite answer. But who knows, and why should you care? It's in the past, right? And that's a very positive way that you're thinking about too, right? It's like that's the way it should have happened. But we don't know, right? And for me, it was always just like, all right, who the fuck cares now?
You just stop giving a shit.
You gotta just stop.
You just your brain gets fatigued from thinking about it all the time. Like,
you get tired, because it's a better way to think how you're thinking. It's like, it's like destiny. That's the way it should have played out, and I'll learn from that, right? So in a way, that's what it is. But all that shit's in the past, and
and even if it sucks, it's just like, well, it's not supposed to be any better. It's like, fuck it, it's just let it suck, And
that's life, man. And we all go through stuff in life that's bad, or we didn't do our best. But we probably learned from those situations so much that probably won't happen again. Or next time that happens, you've got the answer.